Okay, so my name is Ed Pallas. I'm a captain with the Montgomery County Police Department here in Maryland in the United States. We are just outside Washington, D.C. We actually border with Washington, D.C. I live about 30 minutes from Washington, D.C. That gives your listeners I guess, at least a general idea of where I am, because I know your audience is worldwide. So I've been a police officer for 25 years. I'm currently a captain in charge of our major crimes division. Our major crimes division is made up of homicide unit, robbery unit, cold case unit, and fugitive unit, and the victim assistance unit. So those are the crimes we handle. So that's what I do full time. I'm also married to a detective. We met on the job when we were both young patrol officers. She is currently a detective in a different division. She's in the Special Victims Investigation Division. So she deals with crimes against children. And I don't know if you've ever seen this show. It was on a while ago, probably a few years ago. I'm dating myself. It's called Dateline to Catch a Predator. Did you ever see that?
Oh, I think I did.
Yes.
Yes. Is it something like a bit like Cheaters?
Yes, similar to
Yeah.
that. So part of what she does with her unit is they will go kind of undercover online in a chat room and pose as a juvenile. And then through various investigative techniques, they will end up, how do I put this, engaging in chats with men that think they're talking to young juveniles. And so basically they end up arresting the pedophiles for some of the stuff that starts in these online chat rooms and ends up being criminal activity. How's that?
Wow.
Yeah.
That
So I
must
have to,
be incredibly difficult.
yes, I know I couldn't do it. I know most police officers can't do that, but there are police officers all over the world who specialize in that stuff. And I think it takes a very special person to do that. And I do have to say, my wife is a badass. So she's in more ways than one, but she's got the mental fortitude to deal with that. So married, we've been married for almost 20 years now. Next year will be 20 years. And we have three beautiful girls. One is 18, one just turned 18. If you see a balloon in the back behind me that says 8, that's from her surprise birthday party. I have one that's almost 16 and then one that's 12. So three girls. I have to do a quick brag on my oldest. She is an Olympic weightlifting competitor. She is lifting at the national level. She finished last year 6th in the nation for her weight class, and then she's trying again this year. So really proud of all three of them. So
Wow, that's fantastic.
My wife and I are also avid CrossFitters. She's really good at it. I'm horrible at it. I love CrossFit. CrossFit hates me. So I suck at it, but I still do it every day. We've been doing that for about 6 years. And also cancer survivor. So fought that battle about 4 years ago and have been cancer free for 4 years. And as part of the police department, I've also been a hostage negotiator for the last 17 years. So I'm currently kind of the co-leader of our hostage negotiation team. And I started out, I think it was 2003, as a young hostage negotiator. So those skills, developing the communication skills, the active listening skills, really kind of started my fuel into what my real passion is, which is leadership development, leadership training, that type of thing. So in a nutshell, that's me.
Wow. So there's a lot going on, and you're a hostage negotiator. So I don't know where to start now. There's so much. We've had some hostage negotiators on previously, and yeah, that's such an interesting field. So when you get into that, I know that there's aspects of leadership and negotiation that kind of work together, but negotiation is something that you need to know as a leader as well. Have you got any kind of strategies or tips for people that are looking to be better at negotiation?
Yeah, so actually, it's funny, the one thing I forgot to mention is I just finished a book. So actually, by the time this comes out, I believe we're talking about February. It should be out in hardcover, but it's going to be released at the end of 2020. in the hardcovers on Kindle in the end of 2020, and then the hardcover is going to come out in early 2021. So in that book, I do have some strategies, because you're right, there is a lot of overlap, because the idea is that, well, let me dispel a couple myths. First of all, people think, based on probably some movies like The Negotiator, that it's, one person doing it all, which couldn't be further from the truth. You might have one person on the phone, but you're supported by an entire team. We never negotiate alone. You have an entire team that's helping you listen, that's coaching you, that's gathering intelligence, that's going back and forth between the negotiation unit and the tactical unit. So it really is a group effort, with the entire goal is to bring the incident to a safe resolution. So the skills that you use in that really are listening skills. The talking part is easy. It's learning how to listen. And those skills, I think, translate very well to people in leadership roles, and actually into your relationship roles as well.
I think that's really key, because when you're negotiating, people kind of think about sales and how you negotiate a house purchase, or maybe you go to a market and you negotiate that. And I think the nuances of negotiation, and it applies to leadership as well, when you're communicating, are just completely missed. So things like maybe culture, background, language, listening, how important do you think these things are, just as general skills really to know?
So it's interesting, you mentioned culture and background. Those can, as you know, those can be barriers. If we come from different cultures, there's going to be a lot of barriers that neither one of us realize exist. You might use a word or term that I think I understand, but I don't. So now you think I understand, I think I understand, and neither one of us understands. So then it becomes a whole mess. But I'm kind of surprised that really we don't emphasize listening as a skill set in school, because here's the catch. Everybody thinks they're a great listener. We all do. I mean, everybody listening on here, from the very beginning when we started talking about hostage negotiation, everybody is probably thinking, yeah, you know what, I'd probably be a pretty good negotiator because I'm a good listener. And you know what, they're probably right. But here's the thing is, by definition, we're all probably average listeners, but we all think we're above average listeners. And then that's the problem, is when we think we're up here, but our skill set is here, there's that gap. And that's where it can come back and kind of bite us in the behind, if you will. But the interesting thing about listening is just like leadership, listening is a set of skills that you can develop, but you have to constantly practice at it. And we call them perishable skills, because if you're not constantly using them, then they tend to deteriorate and go away.
Yeah, I think that you're right. I mean, I think that I'm a good listener, but I definitely listen well in certain situations and not others. And I think the temptation sometimes is to jump in and say something, because you're trying to respond and maybe put a bit of ego out there to be recognized. But actually, and especially when you're doing hostage negotiation, it's about listening to the other person and letting them offload in a way, because if you let people talk, they will keep on talking and drop all kinds of things out that you might want to use. But if you kind of stop them, then you're never going to let them get to where they need to be. And that's what you're trying to do when you're listening.
That's perfect. So you've been a great negotiator.
I know, I should do this.
Well, I was complimenting you for the watchers, listeners, before we started recording, and I said I've listened to your past episodes, and I complimented Marie that she's a great listener. She very much listens with intention, and she listens with passion, and it translates to all the people that listen to her podcast. She's clearly interested in each and every one of her guests, and that's I hesitate to call it a trick, because it's not, but that's kind of the key to successful listening, is to be interested in the other person. And the problem is we're all dialed into WIIFM. What's in it for me, FM? Because the whole point in most conversations, the whole point is I'm letting you talk only so that I know you're going to come to an ending. And when you're done, then I get to jump in and say what's really important, because it's about me. So that's the problem we face, and you nailed it exactly.
When you're negotiating, do you kind of facilitate the conversation to keep going, or do you try to put in there questions that you might want to know? How do you kind of work that?
So we teach a lot of basic listening skills to negotiators. And one of the things that we teach them is the very first thing is you have to single task. So if I put all my stuff on vibrate, but if you and I are sitting here having a conversation and I'm sitting here, kind of splitting my attention between you and my phone, then I'm going to miss a lot. So the first thing we challenge negotiators is to single task, to make sure that they're completely focused. And the interesting thing we found is even in practice scenarios, after about a half an hour of doing that, people become exhausted because they're not used to focusing all their attention on one person, on every word, trying to kind of block everything out. And the idea is to listen to, as I'm kind of quoting Stephen Covey, to listen to understand, not listen to respond. So if you're really kind of in the flow of negotiations, you're going to go where the conversation takes it. It's kind of the same thing with coaching. I also do some executive coaching, and you have to be very neutral as to where the client takes the conversation. Now, in a negotiation, obviously you do have an end goal, and that is to get them to change their behavior, whether it's to if it's a single barricaded subject, to put down the gun and not harm themselves. If they have a hostage, to put down the gun or knife or bomb or whatever and not harm the hostage. But it's to change their behavior. But in order to do that, you've got to listen with empathy. You've got to develop a rapport, and you have to do that sometimes for many hours before you can then try to steer the conversation and influence them to change their behavior.
That sounds a lot like the way that you need to be as a leader, where you need to get to know your team and understand them in order to be able to do things like negotiate with them.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I really don't even, so if you're a transactional leader, which quite frankly, many people would be satisfied if their boss was a good transactional leader. And that is, the boss promises you something, either praise or an attaboy or attagirl letter or some sort of reward in exchange for you doing a good job. The problem is most bosses don't even give people a verbal pat on the back, let alone a certificate or reward or whatever it is the person values. So there's no transaction there. But if you're a truly transformational leader, you're really not negotiating with people. You're trying to lift them up. You're trying to figure out where they want to go in their career and help them get there. And then the kind of side benefit is, the rising tide lifts all boats. Not only will their performance go up, but your performance and the performance of the whole team will go up.
What do you think are really common skills and themes between negotiation and leadership?
Listening, certainly, for one. Another pet peeve that I've already mentioned is multitasking. How many times have you been called into your boss's office or been on a phone call with the boss or been on a Zoom call with people and they're focusing on something else? Which, it's one thing if it's your coworkers doing it, but if you're in there trying to update your boss on the latest TPS report or status report or whatever it's going to be, and the boss is not real focused, or the boss is looking at you and constantly checking his or her phone, checking messages. Again, most bosses that do this, they're not doing it out of spite. They think they're really good at multitasking. But as I'm sure you're probably aware, all the studies out there show that humans really don't multitask. We do something called switch tasking. And when we switch from one task to another, there's a cost in the middle. And usually that cost is time, attention, and focus. And it becomes very clear to the people we lead if we're not paying attention to them. If we're trying to do a couple things at once, if I'm the boss and you're coming in to give me a report or something, and I'm checking my email, I'm checking my phone, I'm checking two phones because I have a personal and a work phone, the message it sends to you is you're less important than the phone thing I have in front of me. And that hurts people a lot.
One of the top themes that we actually have been seeing over the past few weeks as well is conflict. And I've kind of been thinking about that in the last couple of minutes, because I'm thinking you must be really used to conflict of one sort or another. And we've talked a lot about kind of emotions being involved in conflict and then how to deal with it. As a leader, have you got any kind of general strategies that you could maybe give our listeners in order to deal with conflict in their work?
It's funny, and I might be wrong, but as a leader, the stuff that stresses me out is not, it's not the big conflict. It's not the big homicide investigation or the big robbery investigation or kidnapping investigation or the active shooter situation or the negotiation. It's not that. It's the little things. It's the interpersonal conflicts. And I think the key to that is to realize and to try not to take it personally. Because sometimes if you're the boss, if you're the leader, you're going to make decisions, you're going to do things that not everybody's going to be happy with. And I think if you're probably making everybody happy all the time, there might be another issue there. But I think the key and the thing I struggle with the most is to take a deep breath and to sit back and to look at it kind of from almost a stoic perspective of the event itself is neutral. It's my perception of it that's going to cause stress or going to induce an emotional reaction. And to kind of avoid, as Daniel Goleman calls it, the amygdala hijack, where you go into that fight or flight mode. And in the office, that can look like firing off a flaming email or yelling at somebody or being curt with somebody or just saying something that you don't mean in the heat of the moment. That's when that primitive part of your brain is taken over. So to avoid that amygdala hijack, it's sometimes necessary to take a deep breath. Definitely not to send the email for a good day, right? Or even to say, you know what, I'm really a little upset about this right now. Let's take a break and let's talk about this tomorrow, because I'm afraid and just tell the person, I'm afraid my emotions are kind of taken over here, and that's not going to be a good decision. It's not going to be a good outcome. And I think as a leader, if some people might think, well, that's showing weakness. But I think as a leader, that's just being genuine, because the people that follow you, the people that you lead, because to be a leader, you have to have followers. I think, respect that, because we've all been in that situation where we've kind of had a meltdown and we've said things that we later regret to our spouse, to our partner. Hopefully we apologize to them. But I think as a leader, if you catch yourself in the moment and say, you know what, I'm a little too involved in this, I'm a little too heated, let's just take a break so I can take a fresh look at it tomorrow, I think people have a little bit more respect for you.
Yeah, I think that's something that's really hard to get a handle on, emotions in the moment as a leader, especially because everybody's looking to you and you've got to try and control the situation. But also having the honesty to be able to say, hang on, I don't have to answer this right now. I can answer this tomorrow. I need to take a break. And I think having the confidence to do that it can be very difficult to think, especially when the environment's so busy and there's so much going on and you think, I need to answer this now. I need to get this situation fixed now. Have you got any kind of strategies to maybe that you use or you've heard of that allow people to step back? Because I'm aware that this is something that maybe might come with experience and early career leaders might not know necessarily how to do it.
So it's funny, as you're saying that, I'm thinking of the situation we're currently in with COVID-19 and a worldwide pandemic. And a lot of people are working from home. And this is a bet I would have lost 9 months ago. I would have bet you $1. There's no way police officers are going to work from home. Well, some are. The ones that are doing the frontline work, the ones in uniform that are out there, they're still, fortunately or unfortunately for them, they're still working basically 40 plus hours a week in a upfront capacity. But for some of us who are in the administrative or detective roles, there is some teleworking. But I found the problem with teleworking is, let's say on paper, I'm working from 7 in the morning until 3 in the afternoon, an 8-hour day. Often the emails start, I'm a very early guy, I'm a 5 in the morning kind of guy. The emails start at 5 and I'll start, if I don't catch myself, I'll start replying to emails at 5. I'll go back and forth all day with emails and texts. And next thing I know, it's 7 or 8 o'clock at night. I'm still replying to emails and text messages. So I've gotten a little better with partitioning my day and saying, look, I'm only going to respond to emails between these hours. Now, granted, if it's something serious or ultra important and you have to define what that is, you can make the exception. But it has to be disciplined where you're not going to pick up that phone all the time, because then we're constantly working. Other than the 4, 6, 8 hours, whatever you get of sleep, you're constantly on the phone, and that adds up to the stress. The stress slowly builds up, and right now during COVID-19, there's really no release from that if you're not careful.
Yeah, I think that's a real big issue that you bring up, especially working in leadership and high-powered careers. It's very, very easy to burn yourself out. And as an entrepreneur, I know that I can sit on the email from early in the morning until late at night. How do you kind of work with the mindset in order to pull yourself back from a burnout type place?
I think you need to set expectations with people. And I think they need to know, for instance, right now, my lieutenant, she's on the captain's list. I have a feeling by the time this airs, she will, I'm hoping, have been promoted to captain. And we had a conversation very early on, because we both got transferred to the Major Crimes Division at the same time, about that, because she is more of a night owl. And so I said, hey, Mo, can you do me a favor? Unless it's an emergency, if you need something, if it's just routine, send me an email, because I have my phone set so it doesn't go off with every email. That would drive me insane. I know some people do that. I said, no, if it's an emergency, call me or text me if it's important. And I would try to do the same thing to her early in the morning. I'm not trying to send her, I'm get up at 5 a.m. type person. She's still sleeping at 5 a.m. because and it works out great because she ends up covering more of the late hours. I cover more of the morning hours. But it's just we had that conversation where for the first week or two, I didn't have the conversation, and she would send me a text at 11 o'clock at night. Well, I have to sleep because of a negotiator and the homicide and robbery call off. I sleep with my phone right next to my bed. So anytime that text goes off, it wakes me up. So that stressed me out for about a week until I sat down and just had a conversation with her. And she was fantastic. She said, hey, I get it. And so once we had that conversation and the expectations were set, haven't had a problem since. We've had a great relationship.
Do you find that you have to be quite strict with yourself in terms of, obviously you're partitioning your day and this kind of thing. So it kind of indicates that you're trying to put structure in and routine in so that you're not going to get to a place where you burn out or there's overwhelm or things like this. Is there anything else that you do to, because leadership can be quite all consuming at times, and you can, when I lead big teams, I come home and I'm constantly thinking about them and worrying about what they're doing. Is there anything you can do to maybe step back from that as well?
So I would suggest two things. One is to have a routine, because you mentioned it. It doesn't matter when you get up in the morning, whether it's 5 a.m. or whether it's 11 a.m. Have a morning routine. Have some sort of structure to your day, whether it's get up and read or meditate or have some mindfulness or exercise, but have some structure there, and also have a structured night routine. The other thing I would say is, as a leader, be careful you're not a micromanager. So I'm sure, we could talk about this for a while. I've written a couple of blog posts on this. Depending on where you are, you have to have trust with the people that you lead. And if you're constantly reaching out to them, it's one thing to be, thinking about them, but if you're constantly emailing, constantly calling, constantly following up, what is the point of them having their position, depending on where you are? So for instance, at where I am at the captain level, I have lieutenants, sergeants, and then detectives. I'm not constantly calling them. I ask either my lieutenant or one of the sergeants to get something done, and they generally do it. I mean, people want to please. People are decent. They want, not only do they want to please, they want to do a great job until they've been beaten down by an organization. But that's a separate conversation. But I think if you go in, and I learned this from John Maxwell, if you go into any new job and you just put a 10 on everybody's head, like, on a scale of 1 to 10, they're a 10. If you treat them like a 10, generally, no matter where they are, they rise up to that level. Now, on the other hand, if you go in and treat them like a 2 or a 3, then their performance will drop to that level. And there's been some studies on there, the Pygmalion effect and the Gollum effect, that kind of prove that. So if you set the expectation and you treat people as if they're going to do a fantastic job, you'll be disappointed occasionally, but it's usually very rare. I've found out. Everywhere I've been in my police department, I've just worked. The people have been fantastic, and I think part of that is putting that 10 on their heads, and then they're either already 10s or they rise to that level.
What would you do in a situation where you maybe didn't have somebody that was performing that well, and then you needed to have a conversation with them, and they still weren't really getting it? How would you deal with that?
So I have many. I want to say many times, but a few times. So I think the key is to be completely honest with the person. And if you're like most leaders, new, old, you know when it's time to have that conversation. Well, first of all, you end up putting it off a lot because you don't want to have it. And then if you finally say, okay, it's going to be tomorrow, you end up tossing and turning the night before. And if you think about that, why that's crazy, right? We're not in trouble. We're not the ones that our performance is dropping. It's to come around to your earlier point. We hate conflict, and we will do anything to avoid conflict. And usually what that looks like is I'm just not gonna pay attention to that behavior because I don't want to confront that person. And it's easier just to ignore it and let somebody else deal with it, or just adjust your standards so that you work around it. And in the end, that usually causes bigger problems. And here's here's the quick kind of general case study. If I'm that person who's underperforming and you're my boss, and in the first year working for your company, you take the approach of, I really don't want to have that conversation, it's going to be nasty, I think I'm doing a great job. And then in my second year, I get a new boss and she says, yeah, you're right, I don't want to have that conversation. I again think I'm doing a great job. Fast forward 15 years later, and I'm one of the biggest cancers in your organization, but I think I'm fantastic because nobody has told me anything different. And it's a disservice to me, and it's a disservice to the organization that I work for, all because a leader earlier on should have had that courageous conversation with me. And it doesn't, here's the trick with courageous conversations. You have to make it about the behavior and not the person. It can't be you're lazy or you're slacker or your reports are horrible. It's, hey, here's what happens when you come to a meeting 10 minutes late. This is what that behavior, this is the effect that behavior has on people. If you make it about the behavior, you can have those courageous conversations. I've even had somebody thank me for having one. I've had a couple of people thank me for having them, and they were horribly uncomfortable for both of us. But in the end, I think people will respect you more if you tell them the truth.
I think that's a really good way of looking at it. You're doing the person the disservice if you're not actually having that conversation. And I think when you sat so long in the employee with a boss above you, and you've sat there and been really, really scared of having that conversation when they've got feedback for you, actually you forget that the other person on the other side can actually be just as stressed out, because they then have to try and figure out how to give you that message. That's just really hard.
Well, it's funny. They've done a couple studies now where people crave feedback to the point where they would rather have negative feedback than zero feedback, because it goes back to my original premise. People want to do a good job. People, and this is somebody who's been in law enforcement for 25 years. We generally, when law enforcement are called, you're not at your best. We're not called to the graduation parties, to the baptisms, to the bar mitzvahs, to the births. That's not why you call police. You call police at your lowest moment. So 25 years of dealing with people, for the most part, at their lowest moments, I still believe that most people, the majority of people, are good people, and almost every employee starts out wanting to please, wanting to do a good job. Nobody signs up for a job and says, oh man, I can't wait to work for this company and do the crappiest job I've ever done. That's not what happens. what happens is they come in, they want to shine, they want to be a superstar, they get zero feedback, and they don't know how they're doing. Now, some of them will naturally rise even without that feedback, but most of us will continue doing what we're doing. And if it's not good enough, then we'll continue to be a subpar employee because nobody has told us differently.
Do you find that you get any kind of issues arising with the remote working that you maybe wouldn't have had when you were in the office?
Yeah, I'm a big believer in, when it comes to teams, in cohesion. And it's hard to develop cohesion over Zoom. I'm not saying it's impossible, but it's very difficult to do over Zoom. You have to make it a constant effort. And what I've found in particular, so this one particular person I'm coaching, he's a first line leader, and he started out with pretty lengthy Zoom sessions at the beginning of COVID and was rah rah and all that stuff. And in one of our latest coaching sessions, he's kind of burnt out and his team is burnt out, and he's realized that he can't sustain that rah rah over an hour-long Zoom session once or twice or 3 times a week. It just doesn't quite work. So I think however you can build cohesion and keep the Zoom meetings short, cover whatever you need to cover, allow some time for some social stuff maybe at the end, but you can probably keep them short. But the key is to then follow up individually with people with phone calls.
Well, Ed, we're coming to the end of the interview. It's been so nice having you on today. It's been absolutely fantastic. I've definitely got to follow up with you at some point because this is just fascinating to me. Would you like to tell everybody where they can find you on the internet if you want to be found on the internet?
Sure. So you can go to my website. You can just look up edwardpalace.com or edpalace.com. It both goes there. And then if you're interested in, by the time this comes out, the book will probably be out. But if it comes out earlier, just go to leaderarmorbook.com. Leader Armor, LEADERARMOR book.com. And they can, at least right now, they can download a free chapter, and at some point they can pick up the book on Kindle or Amazon or wherever.
I will definitely be picking that up. I'm absolutely intrigued now. I'm going to get that. Thank you so much, Ed, for being a guest on today. It's been fantastic.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.